What's up, guys?
What is
First
up,
up,
dude? The Kyle Duggar spin move every time I watch the video just makes me giggle.
oh, I know. There's a couple in there that get me jacked up. I mean, just watching Christian getting ready for him to come back next year. But
Yeah.
yeah, so guys, welcome to the first episode of Patriots Uncovered. I'm Wiz.
Dan, AWL here.
So what we're doing here, we want to kind of bring you something each week, go through some news, notes, recaps, just kind of cover all things Patriots, right? So I think one of the first things that we kind of want to talk about is some of the news and notes going on with the team here. So we'll kind of start off with, weekly agenda of news and notes, recaps, any big talking points on the team. And there's a lot more going on this offseason than in off seasons past. So something that we wanted to kind of get together. So I guess if we start with some of the news here, Dan, Kyle Duggar getting the transition tag today. So what do you initial thoughts there?
Yeah. So, it's funny because we were just talking about it, but it's, when I first saw it, I saw people a little angry about it because I assumed they gave him the non-exclusive tag, which means if we don't match, then we get comped. But with the transition tag, like, I'm sure a lot of you have read, if we don't match another team's offer, then we get nothing. So, but by doing the transition tag coming in at 13 million versus I think the 17 or 18 million for the non-exclusive, yeah, I guess in theory you could say like, oh, the Patriots are being cheap. Why are they being cheap with 100 million in cap space? But the safety position, is so devalued and so much cheaper that odds are we're going to be saving money. Even if a team wants to pay him 15 million, 16 million, we could easily match that. And I have a feeling that the Patriots are willing to match pretty high, but they're hoping that they can save a couple extra million here. So I do like the move, even though it is a little bit risky because if we lose him, you get nothing. But I think it's a smart play here that it will allow us to get him to a number that he's happy with, because then an outside team said, hey, you're worth 16 million. Makes him feel good. We get to pay him, and we save some money too. So I think it's actually a pretty savvy move here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was interested in or I'm going to be interested in, is seeing what happens with Winfield, right? Because Winfield just got franchise tagged by the Bucs today. Yep. So he's probably going to be looking to set the safety market there. I think you're right, though. I mean, look, when you've got this much cap space, we're going to have to hit a floor as it is.
Yeah.
Duggar's kind of come up with this coaching staff, if you will, right? Being here these last kind of 4 or 5 years as Mayo came in as linebackers coach, and, guy we'll talk about a little bit later, in DeMarcus Covington. So it does feel like they're maybe trying to get a deal here, but I think at the end of the day, I think you're right. I think he ends up coming back.
Yeah.
So that'll be something to watch for. Eyes on kind of Antoine Winfield, seeing how he sets that safety market. Yeah. Next guy up is, as we kind of use that transition tag on Kyle Duggar, that means that Mike Onwenu is going to hit free agency here. Yeah. Something that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. Not necessarily the thing that we want to see is one of our best offensive linemen hitting free agency, but at the end of the day, I think they do try and, still have discussions with him and bring him back, because I think, Dan, you would agree, with the state of our offensive line, Trent Brown likely out the door. Yeah. He's a guy that we're going to need.
Yeah, he has to be the linchpin at this point. I mean, we don't have a lot to go on the offensive line. And at this point, either you'd think we're either getting Jaden Daniels, or not to, eventually we'll get to this discussion in a show, but Daniels or May, both of them are going to need people to keep them safe and upright. So Onwenu has to be a top end priority. Has to be.
Yeah. Especially because I think when you look, it's not like this free agent class is filled with, a lot of offensive lineman studs across the board. I think he would probably be one of the top rated offensive linemen throughout this whole free agent class. So I know it's a deep draft, but I think we can speak for a lot of New England saying that, that's a guy that we'd love to have back.
Yeah. When he's one of our best offensive players, that's an issue, but it is what it is.
Especially when you're talking about keeping that rookie quarterback upright, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, or Jacoby Brissett for a year. Either way.
Yeah. Whatever that may be, right? So, all right. So a couple other things that happened here in this Patriots offseason, right? These last few months, a lot of coaching changes. Mm-hmm. Offensive side of the ball, defensive side of the ball. So, the guy that the Patriots ended up bringing in from the offensive side of the ball was Alex Van Pelt. He's been with the Browns for the last 3 years as the offensive coordinator. He actually played in the league for about 10 years, but has really been a running back, quarterback, wide receiver coach throughout his career until he got that opportunity in Cleveland. Dan, I think one of the things that we were looking at when we were going through this is just kind of, it looks like he's going to bring that run heavy type offense to New England.
Yeah.
Which I think when you think about a rookie quarterback coming in is probably beneficial, not asking him to throw the ball, 30, 40 times a game or something like that. But what are your initial thoughts on a guy like, Van Pelt and kind of what he's bringing in?
I mean, it's tough because obviously he was not anywhere near like the top choice for us.
Yeah.
But it also makes sense when you're trying to convince someone to come here. It's like you are building from the ground up. So it definitely makes sense, like you said, right? We need somebody that's going to want to run the ball to protect the quarterback, and right now, that's still the strength of our offense. Is even with a shoddy line, is giving it to Ramondre. Who knows what happens with Zeke? But there's a lot of running backs in the draft too that like that position is so devalued. I do think running backs matter, but there is a point where you can just hand it off to people and they can figure it out from there. So he's shown that he can build a pretty successful, at least run game offense. I mean, I wish we also had Nick Chubb, but Cleveland had guys that weren't Nick Chubb that were still successful. So I like the move. Again, it's not the flashiest or splashiest move, but I think it's a step in the right direction, and this can't be something that Patriots fans need to realize. It's not a 1-year thing. This is not a 1-year rebuild. So like setting the foundations in place to be successful and have like a consistently good offense, that's the key.
Yeah, I think you look around the league right now, right, and all the hot names are anybody attached to Shanahan or McVay, right? So I think that's kind of where a lot of our initial thoughts went for somebody like this, to bring somebody in and kind of revamp that offense. I do think that, the phrase having an adult in the room for the first time kind of in a while that's not attached to the old regime, right? So and it does sound like, all the words out of Cleveland, all the, conversations out of there, that he does well with players. And, one of the things that he mentioned in his press conference was, if the player doesn't fit, then how good is the scheme? So it's going to be really interesting to see how he works with our personnel, because, while I think we both like Ramondre and he's probably considered, one of the better backs in the league when healthy, we've got some glaring holes at the other skill positions, right? So I think even more so, probably leans on that run game, maybe plays off play action a little bit more this first year with a rookie quarterback if we end up going that way. But it'll be interesting to see how somebody like him tries to tailor the offense to kind of what we have versus, what we saw with Bill O'Brien and, Matt Patricia and Joe Judge.
Oh God, yeah. And I think there is something to the fact too, it's because the league has gone so pass heavy, and then you see like with the 2 high shells and things like that, it does open up more running lanes because you have smaller, more secondary players. You guys have they have deeper coverages. There is a little bit of a zig to a zag with, making those adjustments there. So yes, it's still passing oriented. Passing does have to be the thing that gets you over the top. But I do think it's a nice way to transition into being a more consistent offense.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, I heard Edelman mention this on a pod a couple of days ago, and it's just about not getting behind the ball. We found ourselves, dropping back to pass on 1st and 10 and putting ourselves in 2nd and 17 in way too many situations, right? So lean into the defense a little bit more, maybe lean on that run game, and we'll kind of see how it ends up playing out here over the course of the year. But another reason too why I think they try and bring a guy like Onwenu back, right? You look at those Cleveland Brown teams with Nick Chubb, great offensive lines, right? So having somebody like Onwenu would be, huge for them. Just to kind of give you an idea of, what the offense looked like under Van Pelt those last kind of 3 years in Cleveland, 4th in rushing yards per game in 2021, 6th in rushing yards per game in 2022, and 12th in rushing yards per game in 2023. As far as a run concept or usage, he really employs the man gap kind of run concept, which is actually something the Patriots have used here the last few years as well. So I did find that interesting that there's kind of some confluence with some of the staples in his run game to what he's bringing over.
Which is going to be just helpful, like learning, going to be a new quarterback almost. I mean, God, I hope so. Right. Regardless of who it is. I don't care who it is. Even if it's, again, Jacoby for a transition year, it's going to be a new
Yep,
quarterback. So like having some semblance of people that are on the staff and on the offensive side of the ball have, all right, that's it. Maybe you call it a different name, but it's the same exact scheme, should help with the transition for sure.
absolutely. When you look at kind of some of the other, elements of his offense, right? I think one of the things that I was a little bit surprised at was the amount of deep throws that they take, or that they've taken in Cleveland those past couple of years. Obviously, they kind of got dealt a certain hand with Chubb getting hurt this year and then Flacco coming in, right? So I think that offense meshed a little bit. But when you look at the last 3 years, eighth in 2021 as far as deep throw percentage, 15th in 2022, and seventh in 2023. As opposed to the Pats, right? You're at 19th in 21, 10th in 22, and 22nd this past year, right?
Yeah.
So do we see some more deep shots down the field, even though it's kind of that more run focused offense? The other thing I noticed too was there's really checkdowns really aren't a part of his offense. 30th in checkdowns in 21, 22nd in 22, and 31st in 23. So when you think about Ramondre,
Yeah.
If that's not an element of the offense that's there, it's going to be interesting to see how he's kind of used.
Yeah, and I'm curious how much of that also plays into, right, with Flacco for sure. We know he loves to push it down the field, and Watson has been mediocre at best. So, I wonder how much of it is also scheme versus the people that are commanding the offense.
Absolutely. Yep. Fair point. All right. So I think it'll be interesting to see us kind of talk about, hearing us talk about the offense now and what it potentially looks like, then kind of revisiting it as we get through free agency and the draft, right? I think a lot of us, with the amount of draft capital that we put into the defensive side of the ball these last few years, I think we all kind of expect this to be an pretty offensive heavy draft. So it'd be nice to kind of talk about hopefully some new playmakers in here as far as the offense goes in the next couple months. But
yes,
jumping off that, Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about the Pats' new defensive coordinator, DeMarcus Covington?
Yeah, so Covington is someone that should be relatively, familiar to Patriots fans as much as, D-line coaches and things like that could be familiar to fans. But he's been here since 2017. He's been the D-line coach since 2020, and we all watch the games. Our D-line has not been an issue at all. They've been fantastic. They finished second overall in run defense EPA, third in run defense DVOA. They've been one of our best, if not our best grouping over the past 2-3 years. And that's him. That's his big hand in that work. So the guys do seem to love him. Right. And I know we're not really going to talk about Mayo here because that's been talked about so much, but just as much as all the players talking about how excited they were for Mayo, seems like a lot of guys also like Covington. Covington's also been pretty popular in the past 2-3 years. I know. I think he's interviewed for a couple of D coordinator positions. He's been one of the the hottest under 40 type guys. He's been a big guy in league circles as someone to look out for. So the fact that they kept him on the staff to me was very good. In his press conference, he's like, yeah, I like my defense to be physical and fast and, all the typical cliche things that defensive coordinators always talk about. But for me, I think the big thing, they're preaching continuity and kind of like you just talked about, even continuity within maybe some offensive run schemes and things like that. He's really key on the fact that hey, what we do here is really good. So we don't want to mess that up too much. Talking about Kyle Duggar and secondary and things like that. Brian Belichick is staying on the staff and he's been in the secondary. So there's a lot of continuity on the defensive side of the ball, which I think is really good because we're going to have to lean on the defense even more, which is a little bit scary, right? Because we've already had to lean on them so much. But I think for me, and I'm curious what you think about it, one of my big concerns is losing Steve Belichick, losing the play caller, right? Covington has said, he's like, I've never done this before. I'm going to have to work on it. Where are you at concern wise? Because that's something for me that I am a little bit worried about versus all of the great defensive players we have. and the continuity on defense, you still got to call the plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm with you there. I think one of the things that gives me a little bit of solace is the fact that, Steve worked with Gerard pretty
Mm-hmm.
closely
Yep.
as linebackers coach, right? So I think there was a little bit of overlap there. Now, I'm not saying that, he was in the room all the time with Steve or he spent as much time with Steve as Mayo did.
Yep.
But I got to think that he was around Steve quite a bit. So it's going to be interesting to see his play calling style.
Mm-hmm.
Do we go more blitz heavy? Do we kind of play into that D line and lean into kind of what you mentioned, right? One of the staples of our defense is that D
Yep.
line, specifically, a guy like Christian Barmore, right?
Yeah.
Do you kind of build it around generating pressure via the linebackers, or play
Mm-hmm.
different coverages back there? I think with some of the guys that if we do end up keeping Duggar, you have Christian Gonzalez coming back this year,
Can't wait.
Matthew Judon. So
Yep.
it's not like we don't have playmakers on that side of the ball. So
Mm-hmm.
it'll be interesting to see if he's one of those guys that takes on the bend don't break kind of what we've had for a while, or decides to be a little bit more aggressive with some of the playmakers that we have on that side.
Yeah, and I know it's not like the biggest focus, but I'm super curious to see what happens with Chris Jones and what's the guy from Miami, Wilkinson. I
Yeah,
mean, if they want to make a splash, even on defense, get one of those guys to get on the line too, the defense would just be unbelievable. So
yeah.
that'd
When
be
I saw the
a lot of fun.
when I saw the Dolphins weren't going to tag him,
Yeah.
he was one of the first thoughts. I mean, with our cap space, pairing him with Barmore, I
Yes.
mean that would make for an awesome defensive line presence.
Yeah, and I guess speaking of defensive line, I know they also brought in this guy Jerry Montgomery from the Packers, who's going to essentially take Covington's role as the D line coach. He's been with Green Bay since 2018. He's their defensive run game coordinator and their D line coach. I did a little bit of sleuthing, if you will, and went read like some Packers blogs and like what fans on Twitter were saying. They didn't really seem to be that broken up that he was leaving, which is a little concerning
Yeah,
because we've all watched the Packers defense at times and they're not the strongest. So that that doesn't feel great. I kind of equate it to when Jacoby Ellsbury left the Red Sox to the Yankees, and Red Sox fans are like, "Cool, see ya."
yeah,
It's
yeah.
like
Take him.
that's not a great sign, but
No,
it it kind of it's for me that's Elliot Wolf being like, "Hey, I like Green Bay. We're gonna build Green Bay in Foxborough."
I mean, when you think about the grading system that they're bringing in for the draft now,
Yeah,
some of the guys and the principals that he's bringing over from Green Bay. I mean, look, I will say that they have had some success over there in Green Bay. Do I want to become the new Green Bay? Not necessarily.
yeah,
Um, but I think to your point, anytime a fan base is not necessarily broken up about either a player or coach leaving, that's usually a red flag.
yeah,
I think that's kind of how we felt like when we saw Patricia latch on to the Eagles. We said, "Hey, good luck," right?
yeah,
Like so.
yeah, yeah. Have fun with
We'll
that.
see. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. But hopefully, Demarcus Covington's fingerprints are enough over that D line where this guy can come in and kind of take over what that foundation that
Yeah,
he's kind of put into place.
yeah, yeah. Just something that I guess I'll be
Absolutely.
watching, but
Yeah,
yeah,
for
hopefully it
sure.
doesn't blow up.
So some of the other changes from a special teams perspective, again, it was a complete overhaul of the coaching staff kind of this past offseason.
Hmm.
Um, so Dan, why don't you kind of just give us a bio of who kind of we brought in and some of the concerns that we potentially have, or some
Yeah,
discussions that we might be having during the season as far as special teams.
yeah. So they brought in Jeremy Springer, who's from the Rams, who's also 34. So he's 34, and same with Covington. So it's a pretty big youth movement, which is
Yep.
interesting. He because I didn't really know anything about him until we signed him. Played at UTEP, started coaching there as like a post grad, moved to Texas A&M. But his whole coaching career, starting in college and then into the pros, has been entirely special teams, which in theory should be good because he's gotten several years of coaching special teams. But for me, his resume leaves a whole lot to be desired. Probably his best stint as a being a quote unquote coach is when he started at Texas A&M for 3 years, and they had some pretty successful special teams, but he was only the quality control coach. He wasn't like the active coordinator or even assistant coordinator. His first special team coordinator job was at Arizona. In his 3 years there, he ranks 58th, 111th, and 70th. Nothing super great. Then he went to Marshall for a year, and he ranked 75th overall. And that's with 4 blocked kicks and a blocked punt. And I think they had a couple of kick return touchdowns. So they had some big splash plays, and they were still 75th overall.
Yeah, it definitely leaves a lot to be desired there.
Yeah.
And correct me if I'm wrong
here,
Dan, but this was he was not our first choice for special teams either.
No. So we know they at least offered Marquise Williams the job, who ended up turning us down to stay in Atlanta. So like best case scenario, this guy was our second choice.
Yeah.
And obviously who knows what happens else from there, but best case, he was our second choice, not even our first choice guy. Yeah. And I think that even goes back to like, so he has okay, whatever, not great, not terrible, but not great college resume. The past 2 years he was with the Rams, he was the assistant coordinator both years. So he wasn't even the Rams head special teams coordinator. And 22-23 Rams, I'm sure you guys have all seen, were horrifically bad. Like their 2023 special teams was some of the worst DVOA special teams in NFL history bad.
Yeah.
The quote I was just we were just talking a little bit beforehand. So as Patriots fans, we know our special teams was brutal.
Yeah.
The Rams special teams was 3 times worse than we were. So we had a negative 3.4 special teams DVOA. The Rams were negative 9.8.
And that's where I question a little bit of like, look, again, I know he wasn't the first choice, but it when you think about some of the struggles that we had in the kicking game and everything like that this year, it doesn't necessarily instill confidence. And it lends me to believe that this is probably going to be a unit that you and I talk about throughout the season as far as mishaps and everything like that. So yeah, I can't say I'm excited about the hire.
No, I the only positive spin I think I might have is that Cam Achord is gone. Like, and Joe Houston, like, so like maybe that's addition by subtraction. Maybe like, well, they were both terrible, so they leave, and now we bring in another guy that might be just as bad. Who knows? And then I guess the only other thing would be, well, he wasn't the Rams special teams coordinator, so maybe him having the actual head coordinator job, he has more say in how things do.
Yeah.
But he's not coming in like Alex Van Pelt, even if he wasn't our top choice, like at least has a track record of being like, okay, he can run some successful offenses. Or like DeMarcus Covington, like, yeah, he's never been a coordinator, but the league seems to love him and he's built a super successful D-line. This guy's coming in and does not have anywhere near the resume as the other two.
And I think what's going to be really interesting about this is because it's a guy that like doesn't have a resume. And look, I know Covington was highly thought of in league circles and everything like that, but this is really going to look back and kind of dictate Mayo's tenure, or at least the start of it, right? Some of these guys that he's bringing in. So I do think he has an opportunity here where if he can create that culture where, look, it's a youth movement, like you kind of mentioned. If he can get all of them rolling on the same page, this will kind of speak volumes for him down the line as far as, look, I have an ability to bring guys in, develop them and put them in to succeed. So I do think it's kind of an opportunity for Mayo here outside of everything else that he's got on his plate. It'll be interesting to see the types of guys that he's brought in, how they all mesh together.
Yeah, and I guess that does kind of speak to one of the big reasons why Kraft seemed to love him. And everyone seems to love him, is that how good he is with people and talking and getting them on board. So it makes sense that maybe, it's like, hey, this guy might not have the resume to the rest of the league, but by talking to him, I get it and I can build him up. So that would, in theory, play into Gerard's strength. So we just got to hope and put our faith in the new coach.
Absolutely. It used to be in Bill we trust. Now it's in Gerard we trust. So
that's right.
All right. Well, I think that about covers it from a coaching perspective here. So, it's it's Tuesday Tuesday, March 5th. Free agency starts in a week.
Yep.
So it'll be really interesting to see what happens during that league tampering period. I think we're starting to get a little bit of breadcrumbs surrounding Kirk Cousins, and I think some of that will dictate, how the Patriots maybe address with a veteran. So, I think next time we talk, diving into some of the free agent landing spots and kind of what that means from where do we go from here, and how
Yep.
does that dictate our draft?
Yeah, for sure. It'll be very interesting because there are, I sent the tweet out earlier where people were like, "Oh my God, remember when everyone loved this free agency class and they're all tagged?" It's like, yeah, dude, how did you not expect that to happen? Like, oh, all these guys, you should have known that. That's how it would have worked. So even with that, there are still some interesting players kind of floating around there. I know Patriots are going to be tied heavily to like Calvin Ridley, for example, and some vet quarterbacks and stuff. So there'll still be some interesting pieces that will get moved around and signed. So yeah, I'm excited to see especially the tampering period. That's always so much fun.
Oh yeah, we're gonna start to get a lot of morsels here coming out in the next week.
Yep.
But yeah, look, when you've got just to kind of jump off your point there, when you've got one of those young receivers like a T. Higgins, like a Michael Pittman, you're not letting them get out of the building more often than not. So I'm in agreement with you that, a lot of the times the free agent classes look a lot better than they are. What will be interesting to see is look, if the Bengals can't come to an agreement with T, is there an opportunity there? If, the Colts can't come to an agreement with Pittman, is there an opportunity there? So, I think that's one thing that'll be really fun to talk about as we kind of get into free agency next week.
Yeah, and I think for those two specifically, both those teams realize that we can't let them just walk to Kansas City. So
agreed.
If they're going to go there, they're going to have to at least pay up. That's as much as it's offensive building, it's defensive of I can't let them go to this team.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
We got a lot more to talk about.
Yeah, we're going to have a busy off season. Hopefully it's an exciting one with a lot of things to talk about, and we're not just going to be trading down throughout the draft. We'll have to see. But guys, thank you for joining us. Dan, thank you. That was really fun to talk through that with you, and I'm kind of looking forward to kind of marching through and talking through this off season with you.
Yeah, me too, man. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Guys, thanks for listening. Be sure to check back in with us as we go through some of the free agency happenings around the league. Appreciate it.